The battle for the rights of families separated by the Trump administration isn't over. It began with implementing a travel ban in majority Muslim countries.
If majority Muslim country was the actual metric, why isn't Saudi Arabia on the list? Why isn't Indonesia on the list? Why was Iraq on the list, but subsequently removed from the list after they changed their security procedures for people coming to and leaving their country?
Then ICE started disregarding the policy of sensitive places and amped up the tactics to detain people in courthouses, churches, hospitals, and even schools.
Yes, it was a policy, not a law. And until it is made law, changing the policy was always at the administration's discretion.
Little by little, the administration has dismantled legal pathways to the U.S. such as temporary protected status for 6 of the 10 countries that benefit from this humanitarian relief: Sudan, Haiti, Nicaragua, El Salvador, Nepal, and Honduras.
So, temporary protected status is temporary. Got it.
And Trump has rescinded DACA, a protection for young adults who came in the country as children before 2007.
Yes, and he put the responsibility of implementing DACA as law into the hands of Congress, where it should have happened in the first place, except that Obama used an executive order to effectively make new law, and Trump rescinded that order, as is his prerogative, seeing as how he is now the executive. The DREAM Act hasn't landed on Trump's desk because of Congress, not because of Trump making them responsible for passing new laws.
Recently, the administration announced a zero-tolerance policy that criminally processes asylum seekers. That resulted in the caging of kids separated from their parents.
Again, it is a policy left to the discretion of the president. Obama went one way, Trump went another. And while the adults are being screened and processed for breaking the law, the kids were, until just recently, not allowed to be detained along with them. And if they had not been separated from their families, they still would have been, quote-unquote, in cages, because they would have been in the same detention center as their parents. It is a difficult situation that these parents are putting their children into by breaking federal law. But in trying to make sure that the children are neither being trafficked or exploited in some other way, pragmatic procedures are often not comfortable ones.
And all in the name of what? Safety? Security? That's what Trump sells it as, but it's really a product of racism.
Racism. Not enforcing existing immigration laws, or demanding better security precautions from nations known to be home to terrorist organizations, but racism. So, if the Trump administration is racist towards people who come to live in this country, how is it that we keep ending up with so many different-looking people swearing in as legal citizens each year? Why isn't there a travel ban on every country with anything other than a majority white population?
Trump is acting on the beliefs he's been spewing since day one of his campaign.
They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists.
Okay, you're not going to hear me argue in favor of Trump's rhetoric, or his diplomatic bedside manner, or his public conduct. But there is a distinction between rhetoric and action. And if you think we shouldn't be taking measures to prevent criminals from entering our country, I would love to hear that argument.
So let's look over why his arguments and solutions, or lack thereof, are flawed. Mexicans aren't bringing crime.
So the Mexican Mafia, the Sinaloa cartel, and factions of MS-13, or their proxies, have not been crossing the border and committing crimes in the United States. Got it.
Here are some real facts. as the percent of the Latinx population in the US has doubled since the early 1990s.
Stop trying to make Latinx happen. It isn't going to happen.
Crime has dropped significantly. For example, from 1991 to 2016, the murder rate fell by roughly half, from 9.8 killings per 100,000 people to 5.3.
Those are the murder statistics for the entirety of the United States. Why aren't you providing illegal immigrant-specific statistics? And why focus only on murder? Why not tell us about theft and assault and drug trafficking? And as well, explain how being in the country illegally isn't a crime in and of itself.
Immigrants are less likely to commit a crime. One study by the Cato Institute in Texas shows that undocumented immigrants had 56% less criminal convictions compared to native-born Americans, and that gap was even larger, 85% for legal immigrants.
Again, being in the country illegally is a crime. They are perpetually committing a crime simply by being here. Their success rate in avoiding police attention or from engaging in further criminal conduct does not change the fact that they are here illegally.
Are they bringing drugs? We can't deny that some of the drugs coming into the US come from Mexico and other Central American countries.
But
what is fueling illegal immigration is the money and weapons smuggled back to Mexico.
What? So, you have no argument about being concerned over the drug trade at the border, but things being smuggled out of the US is the reason for people trying to smuggle themselves into the US. Okay, explain that one to me.
70% of the firearms seized in Mexico from 2009 to 2014 were traced back to the US, according to a 2016 report of the Department of Justice Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. And the New York Times reported that drug traffickers make $64 billion a year from US sales.
So, when do we get to the part of explaining why guns being smuggled out of the US causes illegal immigration? I mean, I can make some assumptions of what the argument might be, but I need to hear it from you first.
Perhaps the US needs to take a closer look at its consumption patterns.
Huh. You know, that sounds an awful lot like, let's blame the victim.
For example, consider how prescription drugs made and sold in the US are a driving force for the opioid crisis. Are they even Mexican?
So, prescription painkiller addiction in Americans is to blame for people attempting to cross our border illegally. Huh. And here I thought it was the guns being smuggled out of the US that was doing that.
Since 2009, the trend has been that more Mexicans are leaving the US than coming to it, according to Pew. Most border crossings are from people fleeing violence in countries such as El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala.
So, it's not that Mexicans aren't attempting to cross the border illegally, it's just that so many others are choosing to leave the US that it makes it not a crime anymore. And most are coming from countries other than Mexico, and their reasons are because they are fleeing violence. But I thought it was the guns being smuggled out of the US and the opioid crisis in America that was causing illegal immigration. Wow, you know, there are so many excuses for why people are breaking our federal laws that all seem to take the blame off the perpetrators for committing the crimes themselves.
This brings me to my next point.
Your next point? I'm still waiting for your first one.
The US is responsible for these crossings. Migrants seeking asylum from those countries aren't coming to the US because they want to. They're fleeing life-threatening situations due to corruption, drug trafficking, and gang violence.
Okay, I am curious. How many illegal immigrants gave those reasons officially by applying for asylum when they arrived at the border, and how many of those claims were made after they were detained by authorities years after they crossed the border?
And the United States foreign policy in Central America has fueled a lot of it. Let's take a closer look at El Salvador. The US spent billions to support the military right-wing government during El Salvador's civil war from 1980 to 1992. This caused many Salvadorans to flee, and for the youth stuck in segregated communities in LA, gangs were the only community they found.
Joining gangs was a decision that they made.
The best known is MS-13, which started in the 80s and is now a transnational gang. Eventually, these gang members were deported back to El Salvador, which is now home base for Mara Salvatrucha, and are the primary reason that the country is one of the most dangerous in the world.
So, people coming here illegally from El Salvador should be given special attention by authorities given its status as a dangerous country, according to you. Got it.
George W. Bush granted TPS to Salvadorans in 2001, after their country was rocked by back-to-back earthquakes that killed thousands and displaced millions.
El Salvadorans were given temporary protected status due to natural disasters that occurred nearly 2 decades ago. Got it.
The DHS is taking away that protections from the 200,000 Salvadorans living in the US because the original conditions caused by the earthquakes no longer exist. Yes, their infrastructure is better, but the country has become more dangerous in the past 17 years. To put it in perspective, homicide rates in El Salvador during 2017 were 60% higher than in 2001, and there aren't job opportunities for the residents of the country. In fact, 17% of the GDP is money from abroad.
You know, those all sound like problems that are the responsibility of the El Salvadoran people to solve. It is their country.
But the DHS refuses to recognize gang violence as a reason to keep protecting these individuals.
Gang violence is a local issue, and it is the responsibility of local authorities and communities to handle. Do you think that Germany or France should begin accepting people from Chicago or Los Angeles as residents merely on the complaint of there being gang violence in their cities? And is abandoning your entire country to violent gangs really a solution to anything?
Instead, they're treating victims of crime as criminals.
Being in the country illegally is a crime. And it is rich that you're criticizing America for treating victims as criminals when you just got done telling us that American drug addicts are responsible for illegal immigration.
The effect that separating and detaining children can have on them psychologically could result in radicalization that have and will make the US less safe.
Radicalization. So, keep families together or we will get more, what? Terrorists? That sounded like a wonderful ultimatum.
What we really need is comprehensive immigration reform.
Call your congressman.
It's ridiculous that in my lifetime there has been no immigration reform. The last comprehensive immigration bill Congress passed was signed by Ronald Reagan in 1986. Yes, Republicans' favorite idol gave amnesty to immigrants who entered the country without proper documentation before 1982. But maybe he felt guilty for all the money he gave to a right-wing regime in El Salvador. I digress.
So, comprehensive immigration reform, in our speaker's opinion, means amnesty, giving millions of people who have broken the law a free pass like Reagan did. Okay, let's say that you do that. Let's say that you give amnesty to all of the people who have been in the country for at least 5 years or more. Tell me, how would you enforce immigration laws upon those people who did not make the cut? As well, how would you then secure our borders to prevent more people from crossing into the country illegally?
Comprehensive reform came close in 2014 when the Senate passed a bipartisan bill that President Obama was ready to sign, but it was blocked by House Republicans. Republicans now have control of Congress and the executive branch. If they wanted to, they could make it happen. But Trump and Sessions? They don't want to solve the issue. They want to continue criminalizing people of color.
H.R. 6136, the Border Security and Immigration Reform Act of 2018, had its most recent vote in the House of Representatives on June 27, 2018. It received 0 votes from Democrats and just over 50% of Republican support. If Democrats had voted for it, it could have moved forward. But they didn't. So it didn't. So tell me again, who isn't making reform happen? And does this make Democrats the enemies of people of color?
And feed the private prison industry, which gave them tons of money.
So you are a proponent of federally owned and funded prisons rather than privately owned ones. Got it.
I'm not satisfied with Trump's executive order, and neither should you.
Well, thankfully, I can think for myself. And there are a lot of things about Trump's presidency thus far that have left me unsatisfied, and in some cases even angry. But at the same time, Congress's unwillingness, both Republicans and Democrats, to effectively legislate on these issues both now and in years past, thus leaves it all in Trump's hands to deal with using the powers at his command. By all means, get the Democrats to help take it out of Trump's hands.
I don't expect that this administration will do anything to protect brown families.
Securing the borders helps to protect all families of all colors who are living here legally.
Because as far as I'm concerned, their mission since day one was based on lies that are only dividing us and clouding the real issues that we face as a country.
You're placing all blame for the current situation on Trump and the Republicans, and calling the motivation of our government to be based on racism when Obama couldn't pass immigration reform over 8 years in office, and now Democrats are the ones stonewalling things in Congress. So, tell me again about who is clouding the issues here.
If you want this to change, support grassroots and legal organizations that are representing or advocating for migrant rights. Also, make sure to find out what your local and state representative stance on immigration is. Demand for a just reform, and vote.
Nice.
Yeah.
And I entirely agree with all of those closing sentiments. The only way to make real change in your country is to make your voice heard, and to act peaceably to improve things. It is counterproductive and self-destructive to run away from the problems of your nation and hope that someone else will solve them for you. Golly, imagine what the world would look like if everyone operated that way. As always, thank you for watching.